Well, it's wonderful to have you here, and I'm just wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what brings you here, why you're here.
Well, I'm here to speak at Cultured Queering Cultures, Indigenous Perspectives on Queerness, and it's really exciting to be able to collaborate with other Indigenous queer artists and activists and scholars from all over. So,
It's wonderful. Can you tell us a little bit about some of your work?
yeah, I do work focused on Cherokee queer and Two-Spirit histories and studies. My PhD is in rhetoric and writing, focusing on cultural rhetorics. I'm a poet and performer, so I do a lot of very interdisciplinary work, but I have been working a long time trying to think through Two-Spirit studies and critiques and movements for resistance and decolonization. But my current project is looking at Cherokee queer and Two-Spirit memory and ways we can re-examine the archive to think about Two-Spirit presence instead of the kinds of absences that we often get given, I guess, by official histories.
Can I ask, do you think that translates in an international context? Or even maybe in a national context, obviously, because you're looking specifically at your own communities.
Yeah, well, I think that, I really appreciate some of the work that Craig Womack has done. He's a Muskoka scholar, saying that intertribal work needs to come from a really solid national center, Indigenous national center. So I do think that there's ways to have these conversations outside of a Cherokee context, and I do gesture towards a larger kinds of conversations to think about decolonization and memory, but want to root it in particular places and histories, and try to not fall into some of the negative parts of pan-Indigenous approaches.
It's risky.
Yeah, yes. But I think that a lot of us, and one of the things that has been exciting to hear at this symposium are thinking through some very similar issues, the kinds of ways that our history and memory get contained or erased by heteropatriarchy and colonization, and the way that we are both rooting our identities and practices in history and memory, but also revising those and not necessarily saying that we can only exist if we have some sort of precedent, right? That we're here now, and we can create identities and movements that work for a larger social justice.
Yeah, there's an amazing strength in that work that you talk about. You're carrying that whole idea of a through line in a way that I think I've rarely heard before, and people are starting to write about it, of course. And I think what was interesting was then seeing how you were integrating some of your creative practice into that work too. Do you see them as separate, or do you see it as important in being able to tell that story?
I don't really see them as separate.
Yeah.
I mean, some of my work appears in kind of separate genres, but I really agree with folks like Malia Powell, who's a Miami scholar, who argues that the only difference, and I'm misquoting her a bit, but the only difference between a theory, a poem, a song, a history is the differences we impose on them. And feminists of color like Barbara Christian, who has argued very similarly that for a lot of us, poetry and art and song they already are theory. And Western academic kinds of categories have tried to say, oh, us talking about your work is the theory, but we've already always theorized. And so I do intentionally try to resist the kinds of boxes that our work often gets put into. Like, this is the scholarship, this is the performance, this is the poetry.
Well, thank you again, Qwo-Li. It was amazing to hear you talk yesterday, and I hope people have a chance to hear and read more of your work. Thanks again.
Thanks. It's great to be here. Wow.